Hello, I think we should start now, and then we've got an introductory activity giving people more time to join us. I'm Gwyneth Hughes from UCL, and I'm also a fellow of the Centre for Online and Distance Education at the University of London, which is where the project we're going to talk about has been is based. And I'm going to be joined by Pete Cannell, who is also a fellow of the Centre for Online Distance Education, and then Elizabeth Burns and Shannon Shah are going to talk a little bit later about their case study, which is part of our project. Okay, and I'm going to got someone else doing the slides for me, so I'm going to just give a little point every now and again when the slide needs to be changed. So just to alert you to what's happening then, which is really now, because okay, so just to start us off, if you can use the chat to send us a very short answer, because we're not going to have time to look at all of them in great detail, just send something, maybe what main purpose of climate change education at university, one reason why you might do this. I'm just going to give a few minutes for you to do this, and also while other people join us. Okay, they seem to be slowing down a bit now. So I've seen a few of them sort of preparing for the future and planning, um, preparing, planning for careers, etc. But Christina, have you got any sort of summary of some of the comments we've been having in the chat?
I can try. I mean, it seems to be very much a case of countering misinformation, empowering students through providing information and education, increasing awareness, and providing them with the means and the ability, the capacities to be able to take action in the future. Very student oriented, always towards the students and what they should be learning from this, empowering the students, and basically raising awareness and looking for solutions for sustainability. I think
That,
that's more or less, yeah.
that sounds like a lot of very good reasons for why we should be considering climate change in university, that there's a very good reason for doing this. So the question, what our talk is going to address is how do we do this? What do we teach? And who's going to be involved? So if we go over to Pete, he will give you a little bit of a background about why we think this is something that's very important that we as digital educators and indeed face-to-face educators should all be doing.
Yes, thanks, Gwyneth, and hi everybody. Yeah, I probably don't need to say that this is an issue which is of really preeminent importance, and it's likely that this year will be the year when the 1.5-degree threshold for increasing global temperature occurs. And global heating is going to affect all aspects of society, what we do, how we work, and how we understand our place in the world. And levels of concern about this are reflected in the numbers of students that say they're concerned, which you see the statistic on the slide. But I suppose our project, we're particularly interested in as distance educators, and certainly for University of London, many of the distance students are in locations where the impact of extreme weather events will have already been pressing very hard on their their lives and their thinking. And so it's not simply about the students in face-to-face contexts, but also online learning students who we understand may not have the same opportunities as those on campus for extracurricular involvement in activity, but yet their lives are going to be shaped and dominated and by some of the issues around climate change. So back to Gwyneth.
I think that fits in very nicely with what the comments we had in the chat earlier, this sort of concern, raising awareness, preparing for the future for our students and thinking about our students. And this, in the comments, you've already got a comment coming in about students in developing countries. Okay, if we have the next slide then, please. Thank you. The other issue about climate change, teaching it, if we're all agreed that we should be doing it, that it's not necessarily something that's straightforward. And there's quite a lot of literature, particularly some work by Tristan McCowan, looking at the problems about teaching something like climate change, because it's an interdisciplinary subject. It crosses environmental science, which is very obviously relating to climate crisis, but there's also economic issues, there's politics, huge amounts of politics, and even psychology, as you look at people who are, impact on people who are getting worried and anxious about the future. So there's all sorts of expertise in different disciplines required to really understand what's going on. So that's a challenge. There's also the epistemological challenges, because climate change is associated with a lot of uncertainty and controversy. We had all the climate deniers and now climate delayers, disagreements about what is going to happen when. I mean, although there's increasing agreement that this is a thing, the man-made effects on the climate. But there's also all the stuff about what we should be doing about it, climate mitigation and action. There's a lot of controversy about what the solutions are, as many of you will know. So that's something to take into consideration. And then there's an issue about the pedagogy. How do we actually teach this? This isn't a subject that you can just deliver as lots of scientific facts, because that is not going to be helpful. It needs students to engage in problem solving and reflection and discussion, and even maybe thinking about ethics and conflicting values, and thinking about what this means for their own lives, or our lives, our current sort of society, and how we travel, how we consume food, and what will happen in the future if there are problems with our resources and with increasing the difficult global events. And then the ethical issue is, of course, the countries that have contributed least to this problem, the carbon dioxide emissions, are the ones often who are getting the worst effects with the flooding and the temperatures. And there's a question about decarbonising their economies of countries that are developing countries. I think we've had comments about that in the chat. So these are all really quite difficult, big issues that we may not feel, well, certainly I haven't felt particularly expert in able to deal with. So, but if we're going to be teaching this, obviously, how are we going to sort of reskill ourselves and get ourselves up to speed? So a little bit more about the project now.
Okay, yeah, so I want to say just a wee bit about what we did in the project before we then go on to explain what we found. And so there were really, I suppose, 4 parts to it. We conducted a literature review. I should say that all of this is contained in a final report, which is going to be on the Code website very soon, but I think not exactly now. At the moment, it's not there. So in the literature review, we just reviewed a lot of the issues that Gwyneth has just talked about, and which range from, some issues where it's seen as a very practical thing, but in other places where it actually brings questions of, how we understand curriculum and how we approach curriculum into view. We looked at distance learning programs in the University of London and how they were addressing climate change. And what we did was surveyed program directors of 11, in the end, 11 different program directors contributed to the survey. And then out of that, a subset volunteered to take part in interviews. So it was a small scale pilot, but one that I think we got quite a lot of very useful ideas from. And then what we also provide in the report is a case study of one of the programs, and we've also provide a curated set of mainly open source climate change resources, because that was one of the issues that came up, and we wanted to kind of move in the direction of making it usable for people from across a range of disciplines who weren't necessarily kind of going to have the time to investigate all of the different angles that they could, but to go to a set of resources which were usable, adaptable, and of good quality. So that's all in the final report. And I'm now going to go back to Gwyneth, who's going to talk
about. Yes, I put a link to the resources, which I hope is a link in the chat, which I hope will be a link to that. So they are actually freely available. They're all open source resources that you can pass on and use. And yes, this session is being recorded, so you can certainly save it to use with people. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the actual findings of the project are, or were, or are. So, and some of the sort of themes that came out of the project. And we had the survey and we had some interviews. And in the survey, everybody agreed that universities should have some responsibility for climate change education. But what they were less sure about was how it should be taught, whether there should be a separate climate change modules that would particularly just address climate change, or whether it should be embedded into all parts of the curriculum in depth, or just little references here and there to climate change in the curriculum. There's all sorts of ways that this could be done, and that's what came out of our survey. And in the survey also, 73% said they did promote student discussion or reflection on climate change as part of their curriculum. And about half of those said it was formally, and half of those said it was informally. So there obviously is discussion going on, but it's very sort of under the radar and invisible. And then finally, another theme that came out from the survey and the interviews was that there was really not much information on what particularly distant students know already about climate change, or what they want to develop. And there's a quote here from one of our program directors, who is saying that students on campus, that they're aware that they're interested and want to know more, and some of them are doing really, really well, taking good care. It's sort of being careful about their own carbon footprints, but we don't really know much about the distant students, and we don't know whether they are very knowledgeable enthusiasts, whether they're skeptics, whether they're involved in action. It's very hard to know unless, of course, we ask them. So if we just move on. Of course, this is quite a small study, and what the people who certainly took part in pilots and in interviews are what we might call climate change engaged teachers, which is a term that Greer et al. Identified for school teachers. They are enthusiasts, so it's easy to talk to the enthusiasts, and they seem to have no difficulty in making climate change education relevant for their discipline. But they did say they would like more resources, hence our development of that resources list. And it didn't seem to be a problem about people in non-science specialist subjects, and not really knowing what the scientific information is, what the debates are, and the values. It seems like it can be done. It can be with some sort of thought and enthusiasm. This can be easily incorporated into whatever discipline. In this case, divinity could even be in arts disciplines, social sciences. People can do that. And these climate engaged teachers seem to be aware that it's going to be challenging, there's going to be epistemological challenges, and it's going to be about values. So I don't think that doesn't seem to be an issue really for the people we had involved in our study. But what did seem to be more of an issue for the enthusiasts was the challenge of the pedagogy and the curriculum redesign. And this was particularly a challenge for those for distance learning and digital materials, e-learning, because this materials production is done well in advance. And that's quite difficult for a discipline that's uncertain, constantly changing and updating material about, whether it's about global changes and what's going on the international stage. So then there needs to be, it's very hard to have a fixed set of materials that are prepared well in advance if the goalposts are constantly changing. And also students are going to need to be able to engage in discussion. So as this programme director says, where are the spaces and platforms where students can really discuss some of these quite challenging issues? So they've got some hints there that there does need to be some kind of pedagogic transformation in distance learning, away from production of materials that are full of facts and fixed information to something that's more uncertain and fluid. The time to actually prepare new materials, I mean, we can provide resources, but how you can then turn them into teaching materials, there needs to be, this is a recommendation we have for distance learning, is that there needs to be a trained curriculum support team who prepare the distance materials and the online materials, who are able to work in this kind of new kind of way, where you maybe have more last minute changes to programs, updating something with the latest COP conference, whatever. You might need to be able to be much more agile. I think we're going to move now to look at the case study, and Elizabeth and Shannon are going to talk to you in a bit more detail about the particular changes they made to their programme and how they're doing it in the programme. So we're very grateful to have this example. So I'll go over to you then, Shannon and Elizabeth.
Thank you, Gwyneth. So we're going to look at 4 areas briefly, and these are summarised on this slide that you can see at the moment. So the first area is climate change and the overarching aims of our particular programme. Secondly, how do we include climate change materials in our programme? Thirdly, what was helpful and what was challenging, and what did the students think about it? And fourthly, the further work which we would like to do and the support which we would need to have in order to do that. So next slide, please. So our online Divinity programs then offer people a flexible way to study religion, the ways in which religion can provide meaning and value to human life, and the ways in which it interacts with many aspects of human life. So science, culture, global politics, for example. And since climate change is an important human concern too, religion often has something to say about that, and it can be influential in changing people's thoughts and actions. So, for example, the World Parliament of Religions said in Towards a Global Ethic, historical experience demonstrates the following: Earth cannot be changed for the better unless we achieve a transformation in the consciousness of individuals and in public life. In the Catholic tradition, Pope Francis, in the papal encyclical Laudato Si', outlines various facets of the environmental crisis, and appealing to the notion of the common good, he writes, "Human beings are creatures of this world, enjoying a right to life and happiness, endowed with unique dignity. So we cannot fail to consider the effects on people's lives of environmental deterioration, current models of development, and the throwaway culture." And in the more recent Laudate Deum, which was published only in October 2023, he quotes the African bishops who've said, that climate change manifests a tragic and striking example of structural sin. In the UK, Eco Church, run by the Christian conservation charity A Rocha, offers awards at 3 different levels to churches who can demonstrate care for the climate in the context of their worship. Looking also at the stewardship of their buildings, their land, community and global engagement, and encouragement of an environmentally friendly lifestyle. There are thousands of churchyards across the UK, and according to Andy Atkins, who's the chief executive of A Rocha UK, they are some of the least polluted lands around. These Christian initiatives are also linked with climate and environmental work undertaken by other faith communities in the UK, such as those coordinated by the charity Faith for the Climate. And one of our tutors, Shannon Shah, is also a part-time director of Faith for the Climate. Although through this connection, we've also connected our students and staff, faith communities, and the alumni community of the Heathrop Association, which is the current incarnation of Heathrop College, formerly of the University of London, and where our programme originated. And so, for example, Dr. Shah led a webinar a couple of years ago on climate justice, what's faith got to do with it, just before the COP26 conference in Glasgow. And attendance at that event was surprisingly good. And there was also very good engagement on our programme's Facebook page when I promoted it in advance of the webinar. So there's definitely some interest in that. But over to Shannon now to talk more specifically about how we deal with climate change in our programme.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Next slide, please. So as a tutor here for more than 5 years now, I'm currently tutoring Islam. Just before this, I was tutoring interfaith relations. I've noticed that some modules which I inherited coming into this role already include some topics or assigned readings that contain some explicit references to climate change, even though climate change is not the main focus of these readings, but they do mention climate change. And in one of my modules, Religion and Science, which is a level 6 module, this is very, very clear. Quite a few topics and readings have these references. And I know some other modules that I don't teach have that as well, such as Religion and Ethics, which is a level 5 module. Some of the other modules that I've inherited, I've noticed contain passing references to things like environment or ecology in some of the readings. So I think what really would help is if I had the time and resources to just do a much closer audit to tease these references out and create prompts for them as activities or coursework questions and so on. So for example, one of the modules I teach now, Introduction to Islam, level 4, actually has an essential reading under the topic of Islamic law or Sharia. And it poses questions about what is the role of Islamic law in thinking about the connection between human behavior and environmental degradation. And in one newish module which I compiled back when I was tutoring interfaith relations, this was a module called Interfaith Relations, level 6. It's now retitled Religions in Relationship. Many of the readings didn't contain explicit references to climate change, but because I'm also the director of Faith for the Climate, and according to Gwyneth's typology, I am an enthusiast as well. I would sort of, in the emails that I would send to students on the topics every week, I would create prompts or context setting sort of paragraphs to relate some aspect of interfaith relations with climate change or environment and so on, especially in the lead up to COP26. And I also include now environment and climate change in the list of dissertation topics, which I'm willing to supervise, which all the students who are undertaking dissertations can see when they look for module tutors that they want to work with for their dissertations. Next slide, please. So to recap, what's helpful is the knowledge that I have. I'm confident that there are already a number of direct and indirect references to climate change or environment and ecology in our materials. And I, as a teacher enthusiast, can readily connect these examples with plenty of relevant examples that are ready to hand just because I keep up with the news and in my other work as a practitioner in the climate and environmental sector. The challenge, however, is having the time and the support to conduct a very systematic audit of these materials so that I can eventually revise or rewrite the syllabuses coherently. You know, like I said, create questions for activities, prompts for coursework, and so on the VLE, on the virtual learning environment. And there's also the need to refresh or increase the number of new and focused readings on religion and climate so that these are more up to date. Like, you know, Elizabeth was saying when or Gwyneth was saying when there's a new development at the UN climate talks or something. So in terms of student responses, I personally haven't yet encountered any students who want to focus their coursework or dissertations on climate change. But having said that, this does not mean that there is no interest at all. Like Elizabeth said at the webinar that I spoke at in 2021, it was actually really well attended. There was really good engagement. So I'll hand back to Elizabeth for the next slide.
Thank you, Shannon. So as Shannon has explained then, in the longer term, we have a number of module-specific goals. In the shorter term, we might consider running an event, perhaps on religion and the environment, either online or perhaps in central London as an in-person event. But we would need resources for both levels. So for longer term module-specific improvements, we'd need funding to update and to work on our syllabuses and our other materials. And for the short-term goal to host an event, we'd also need technical help and funding to support that. Also some help with the administration. So there are significant resource implications, which for a small program particularly can be quite challenging. So those are some of the practical things which we're trying to address, but we are hopeful that we will manage to do that in the future. So thank you very much, and back to Gwyneth.
Oh, thank you, Shannon and Elizabeth. I think it's very useful to hear that we're all talking on the same in the same way, that what the things that your programme fits with sort of more general comments that I was making earlier. But you've got some really good ways of getting round this business of having to prepare well in advance by putting in little activities through emails. But I think also your point about the funding you would need to do this on a more sort of substantial scale, how much more support you'll need. What we'll do now, we're going to go into focus groups, and there's going to be some time for some questions at the end. But I'm just wondering if before we do that, whether Christina, you've picked up any particular things in the chat that we might look at. I certainly noticed
there was a theme which I think might have resolved itself, but there was a discussion earlier in the chat concerning what is the relationship, or to what extent is climate change education connected to sustainability education, with acronyms ESD and ESF, EFS, which I'm afraid I'm not familiar with. Did I make that clear enough?
Yes, that's very clear. Education for Sustainable Development, which is also been ongoing for a long time, and sustainability education, I mean, is not new at all. And there's a whole host of other issues. And there's all the UN sustainability goals to do with sort of poverty and global environment and so climate change isn't just one issue. It does connect to a whole load of other issues. So I think the question of how that's done is quite an interesting one. But it seems to be that climate change is going up the agenda, I think, just because of the existential threat and the crisis and the sort of urgency that is affecting absolutely everybody. It's not a problem for the developing world, or it's an international problem for humanity that needs to be addressed quite urgently. So I think that I think there shouldn't be a competition between sustainable development and people who are looking at energy conservation and recycling and distribution of resources in the world. Those sort of issues are all interrelated, and so Yeah, so I do think that's a very, very strong point. Well, I think probably the best thing to do is to, if we don't take the next slide, is to go into focus groups, into breakout rooms, so you can discuss, have a discussion, then come back with any questions. We'll have some time at the end. So if we go into breakout rooms for 10 minutes, and Matt is going to set these up with about six to eight of you in each group. And just discuss how you are addressing climate change, and as I put sustainability in, because I don't think you can separate them, how you are addressing those in your curriculum, if at all. I mean, and then how you might develop this further, and think about what the main enablers and obstacles you have are. So when we're ready, we will go into the breakout rooms and then come back in about 10 minutes or so. How is that going?
Yeah, so I'm just creating the breakout rooms now. So
Yes. All right.
they
Well,
are now open. So we've got 6 rooms. You should have just received your invites.
okay, great. So if we can go into the rooms, and we'll call you back in about sort of just after 2:45. We'll give you plenty of time.
Okay, all the rooms are closed, so everyone should just be appearing now.
All right. Okay. Well, welcome back. So I think for the rest of this webinar, we really like to hear from you on any questions or any summaries or interesting things that arose out of your breakout rooms. Any suggestions for how we might take this all forward? So if you'd like to either raise your hand if you'd like to speak, or send a message to the chat, and we'll look at the chat messages as well. Maybe it's is there any...
Liz has put her hand up.
Okay, Liz.
So just something from our little group where we had myself from a careers and employment background, Elizabeth from a psychology background, and Georgina from a risk management background. And we talked about, how to eat the elephant in small chunks. That it's such a big topic. How do you boundary it to do something meaningful? And Elizabeth talking about how her research relates to the human element and how you empower change and enable a people and moving away from a sort of guilt-driven approach. And Georgina was talking about how, from a risk point of view, the sense of should there be something that all students and possibly all staff engage with? What would a sustainability module look like if you were going to require everybody to do this? And then what do you do with the resistance of the fact people think, well, I didn't come to do this. And so that challenge of that. And I reflected the fact that my student cohort, I am very well aware when I sit in a webinar that I have people who are living much closer to the front line of climate change than I am. So to your point earlier, Gwyneth, and how do I, when it's not my area of expertise, have a sensitivity to the fact of my my position of environmental privilege. So that we thought, and then we ran out of time. We could have kept going.
We kept going, right? Well, I think that's great. That's really, really all very interesting, and all represents why this is such a fascinating area to try and look into, and it shows some of the difficult things that could come up, as you say, students who are living on the front line, and then resistance of students, and obviously students don't want to feel they're being guilt tripped, and there's all sorts of very difficult issues. I think we just have to be open and honest about everything, and say and just be transparent and say, yes, some of us are living with great privilege and some of us aren't, and other people have got huge disadvantages. So, and just not and I have somehow create a space where people feel that they can speak their minds in an unthreatening environment, which obviously when you're doing something online like this is quite difficult, probably harder in online and distance education than it is in a room where you can maybe feel more comfortable with people talking about controversial issues. So did you come up with any suggestions in your group, any sort of apart from any suggestions on taking this forward, or was it just doing it, getting on with it?
I think we all felt and you is how fascinating it was to have that transdisciplinary approach. Just having that short opportunity to look through Elizabeth's eyes or to look forward to Diana's eyes and thinking, oh, that's what it looks like, from there. We only had minutes to do that, but I think that was very interesting. And so I think that we didn't sort of name suggestions, we were still more exploring the problem. But also I think coming from that, I think it does underline the value of dialogue and dialogue from contrasting disciplines. I mean, Elizabeth used words I'd never heard before, and I was like, excellent, which was, and I thought, oh, looks really different if you look at it through that lens. So I think that's suddenly what I got out of our conversation.
Thanks. That's it. And have you got other people who'd like to add to this discussion, or and any other group who've got some really some profound things to say about their discussion, or not necessarily profound, just interesting about my colleagues, do you want to come back on this comment about transdisciplinary conversations, which is something we've had a little bit in our project? Claire, got Claire here. Claire first, then.
I've always had a bit of a problem with this because it's a topic that I'm personally and politically very interested in, but my discipline is the molecular life sciences. Just have difficulty working out what angle the climate change would have there. And one of the people in my little breakout group essentially said emerging tropical diseases. Well, not so much emerging tropical diseases as tropical diseases that are there, but are crawling north, so to speak. I suppose crawling south in the southern hemisphere,
yes.
which is a very good point. Obviously, I'm aware of it, and we teach them, but I've not really taught them through a climate lens.
Well, I think that's a very good example of how you can do it. That's what the challenge is, to rethink ways in which we talk about anything. Almost really is going to have some sort of relevance to climate change. And Robert, you had a comment to make as well.
Yes, so much. Yeah, we were in our group with Michelle. I hope I pronounced it well. University of Zurich. So we were discussing, and we said that we are still at a preliminary stage. I'm actually seated here in Gaborone, Botswana, which is in Southern Africa. We actually, embrace sustainability, but in terms of climate change, we haven't gone through that so far. But we were thinking of saying we can actually club up with other universities and probably develop curriculum together as collaboration. And like what the other presenters were saying, some colleagues are good in this area. We bring them now as different guest lecturers or professors for that particular area. If I'm good in terms of finance or risk, I'll then focus on risk and so forth. That will actually help. And, it will be good for cross-pollination. The students will be from maybe Europe, and our students are from Southern Africa. They will learn, global, what is really happening in the world. And I'm actually also teaching a module called Innovation and Sustainability, but for doctoral level, where they have a modular. It's actually exciting because the students that I have, they are coming from around the globe, and they contribute quite a lot. But at undergrad, we want to bring it more, starting maybe as a club, so that it brings awareness to different students, and then those who are interested, they can actually also, train other students. So maybe Michelle wants to say something. Thank you.
But Michelle, do you want to say anything? Because you've got Balasubramaniam, apologies for your
Not to
name,
worry.
splendid name. You
Uh,
wanted to say something.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Just
Yes, I can hear
yeah.
you.
Okay. I think with reference to the idea of a global partnership in terms of different disciplines and different people contributing from different regions of the world, I am a senior research fellow at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies at the School of Advanced Study. And one area where interdisciplinarity might be able to work meaningfully would be to define it in relation to certain geographies. In other words, rather than being global, if the focus would be within a specific country or region or city. So in other words, restraining it in relation to specific geographies or specific experiences might be able to open up complementary but differentiated expertise to bear on problem solving. So when we are focusing on problem solving, the one area, I'm not excluding the global remit, but I'm just wondering whether the balance has to be between restricting it within certain parameters in order to obtain interdisciplinarity or expanding it globally, north, south, etc., whether that would be more profitable. My experience so far has been that restraining certain parameters would be as effective as expanding it globally.
Well, I think you make some very, very, very interesting points, and I think maybe we need all of it to happen. And the important thing is we've got these cross-global communications and partnerships and relationships, because this is a global issue. So I think that's really good. Any other? I'm aware that we're rather running out of time. But thank you all for your contributions and comments. But have we got any group that would like to just briefly say something? Because I think what we're showing quite clearly is what we need is much more connection, communication, talking across the globe, across disciplines, with students, between students. This needs to be something that there's far more. We need more conversations, and conversations that people feel that they're welcome to participate in. Yeah, climate lens people. Anything else from the chat, Christina, that came up that I haven't really been able to monitor all of that. There's some wonderful long messages.
One big thing that there are two courses that have been mentioned in the chat. One of which was Andy Lane has discussed or given a link for a course which is a new course which is offered by the Open University. I assume that's the UK Open University. That's on supporting climate action through digital education. And the second one, which was offered by or brought to our attention by Nicole Bloom, is a Future Learn course, which I think she developed previously, Education and Sustainable Development. So those two courses, the links are in the chat. And then apart from that, there's obviously the beginning of discussions about the use of language and disciplinary language and epistemology, and it's big. So the language is huge.
There's a lot to talk about. I'm just aware Dominic's just put a hand up. Do you want to just say something very quickly, just as we wind up?
Thanks, Gwyneth. Just very quickly, I suppose this event has demonstrated the extent to which lots of people in lots of different places are beginning to see the urgent need to do something in this. And this is also demonstrating the desire to probably pool skills, capabilities, ideas and resources. And maybe this is a useful starting point as a framework for doing this more collectively.
Yes, thank you. We need more. We've got the courses, we've got the enthusiasts, we've got the enthusiasm. So let's hope for more events like this. And I just would like to thank Matt for doing all the work behind the scenes, and for all my co-presenters, and all of you for all your amazing comments. I'll go back and read at a later stage. So thank you to everyone, and I hope that we might be able to discuss this further. So I would say goodbye for now.
Aye.